I'm Matt Carey, documentary editor at Deadline.com. Welcome to the Deadline studio at the Cannes Film Festival. I am with director-producer Eugene Jarecki, whose film is The $6 billion Man, B with a billion. Welcome to our studio. Thanks so much for being here.
Delighted to be here. It's nice to see you again.
Great to see you. We talked about your film about Elvis that was at Cannes several years ago. This is a very different topic. Tell us who the $6 billion man is.
Well, I think what people will hear about it is that it's a film about Julian Assange, who, for people who don't maybe remember, Julian Assange created something called Wikileaks in the early 2000s. And that was an organization that would allow whistleblowers, people inside governments or corporations, particularly in America, to share with the public things that they thought the public needed to know. And so in 2010, this became a highly controversial matter because a private in the U.S. military, Chelsea Manning, gave to Wikileaks something toward 1 million documents that revealed some of the crimes committed by America in its operations in Iraq and the Middle East and elsewhere, but also just the way that America really runs the world. And this was not a very welcome thing for U.S. policymakers in both parties to deal with. And so what we witnessed is about 15 years of going after Julian Assange to bury him and his team. And ultimately, the U.S. government was willing to spend $6 billion to try to destroy him, which is what the film really reveals. There was some very new evidence that came to light, came into our possession that we wanted to share with the public also.
Yes, I wanted to ask you specifically about the $6 billion figure, because part of that was essentially, well, one might call it a bribe, an attempt to get Ecuador, which was housing Assange in its embassy in London, to release him and get some aid, shall we say, in return for that.
The president of Ecuador at the time was Rafael Correa, quite a loved figure by his people. And he took the unusual step in a world very controlled by America of standing up to America when America wanted to extradite Julian Assange to America to punish him for the releasing of these truths, this evidence of American war crimes. They didn't like that, so they went after him. But the president of Ecuador, Rafael Correa, would not allow that to happen. He wanted due process to unfold, and he did give Assange asylum in that Ecuadorian embassy in London. It took some time, though, because when he was succeeded by his successor, a man named Lenin Moreno, that was right around the time that Trump got elected. And officials in the Trump administration met with Moreno and his team, and ultimately a $6 billion figure was arrived at in the form of a loan that Ecuador desperately needed from the IMF. And isn't that how America does so much of our overthrowing of democratically elected governments in the world, democratic systems in the world, is that we effectively bring the power of money to bear. And so they were able to pay $6 billion for Ecuador to, as Rafael Correa says, deliver Julian Assange to them. And delivering it in the eyes of the Ecuadorian government was torture Julian Assange in the embassy so badly that he will leave of his own volition, because you can't just kick a political asylee out. He's got to leave of his own volition. So they undertook to torture him in that embassy. And the evidence of that torture is just one part of what we tell in the $6 billion man.
All right, let's talk a little bit more about some of the important documents, many millions in some cases, that WikiLeaks released. You mentioned the files that came initially from Chelsea Manning, but there are many others. The U.S. diplomatic cables, for instance, which created an enormous scandal. And in your film, you make clear that WikiLeaks, in working with the New York Times, Der Spiegel, with Guardian, other organizations, carefully redacted those, released a portion of them, about 10% of those cables. They were essentially blamed later on for the full unredacted leak of them.
Yes.
That created a sensation, but they were somewhat, on the basis of your film, I think it would argue, were unjustly tarred with this accusation of recklessly and randomly releasing all the cables.
It's been a lot of propaganda levied at Julian Assange and his team, and I think what we learned is how deep that propaganda runs and how much it has affected how everyday people think about this group of people. You know, in the movies and in literature, we love the rebel rebels in Star Wars going up against the Death Star, or we love the Hunger Games, the characters going up against those in power. We love it throughout literature. But when it comes to our own lives, we're very easily convinced that a young band of well-meaning kids, which is what they were, who found a way technologically to outfox a superpower, that somehow they're shady or they're up to no good. We might want to question those narratives. And what I learned in making the movie is that those narratives run very deeply and very corruptly in our history. And for example, one of the big examples is the one you give about the famous U.S. diplomatic cables. Those were actually given to WikiLeaks, we assume also by Chelsea Manning. But WikiLeaks had worked with those other journalism outlets, the New York Times and others, to very carefully redact them. But it was unfortunate that a editor at The Guardian wrote his own personal memoir about his time working with WikiLeaks. And this was very short. He did it very quickly, as he says in the film, because they had to write a book in 3 weeks to get it out quickly and like get it while it's hot. And in doing that, I think he acted recklessly. And in the book, the film will expose to you more than I want to say, but suffice it to say, it was not Julian Assange who shared the 251,000 files with all of the unredacted names in them with the public. It was another person whose story is told in the film, and very sadly, Assange and WikiLeaks have been tarred with something that they were not guilty of.
As you know, well, I believe Julian Assange himself directed a documentary. That's not one I have seen. However, I have seen Risk, which is Laura Poitras's film that premiered here, I believe, in 2016 and Cannes. And of course, Alex Gibney has made a film. So some people may wonder, well, why revisit Julian Assange now? I don't want to answer that for you, but certainly there have been many developments, including his ultimate release after a plea deal. But tell me about wanting to look at this case now in 2025.
It matters now more than ever. The truth matters to us more than ever because we're living in a world that really feels like it's spinning out of control to most of us. So we want to know what's going on. And when you find out that the U.S. government was willing to spend $6 billion just to bury one truth seeker, it tells you what they think about the truth. The very truth we want to know. So there's more reason than ever to understand the Assange and WikiLeaks story because it relates to everything we're all about to face in our own world. We're all about to be Julian Assange. We're all about to be WikiLeaks. What truths are we going to question in a world where it's no secret that we all feel there's a kind of fascism rising in the world? Country after country are turning away from democratic institutions. Well, democracy is about truth. It's about the public's right to the truth. It's about knowing the truth so you can be a good voter. You need to know what the hell is going on in order to be an alert and knowledgeable citizen. And so I think it's at the heart of things now, but of course in the intervening years, after colleagues of mine have made previous films, information that frankly just wasn't available at the time has come to light. It was a kind of a cold case, and we got incredibly dark, fresh evidence that I wanted to share with the public.
We hear in the film audio of the plea deal where Julian Assange is in court and essentially, as I interpret it anyway, acknowledged that the U.S. government could make a case against him for violating the Espionage Act. This is very controversial. As he says, it's like, well, the First Amendment of our Constitution, U.S. Constitution, is in direct conflict with the Espionage Act. So there's that question that is out there. But we do see, of course, that Assange was released. He returned to Australia. Right. However, he is heading to Cannes, as I understand it, for your film.
It is rumored that he will be here on the red carpet. And we are excited at that prospect. You never know with Julian Assange, but I'm told that he may appear. And one hopes so, because I think after 15 years of burial by the U.S. government, for Julian Assange to walk the red carpet in as prestigious a locale as Cannes, in a country like France that very often positions itself as a kind of older brother to America, a wiser, more weary, more world-aware older brother, because what happened was that the French had their revolution for truth first. And so when we followed them, they look at us like a little brother who kind of got the memo, but kind of dropped the ball. And so for Julian to be here, having emerged victorious over the U.S. government in so many ways, and as such a cautionary tale about the excesses of America, I think it's a very appropriate tale to be told at the Croisette in Cannes.
Just last question for now, but what can you tell us about release plans? We know that a number of films on political topics, on sensitive topics, shall we say, for instance, the BB Files, had a difficult time getting U.S. distribution, not necessarily the case abroad. How about for your film? What can you tell us about it at this stage?
Oh, I think this will just be catnip for American distributors. I think they will run to purchase it and release it because they, after all, are in the pursuit of truth, and they want us all to know what is happening in our world. And so, of course, they'll run to this and they'll give it top billing and fill movie houses and streaming hours with it. I'm confident of that, as I am in the dream, the American dream itself.
All right, that gives us a lot to think about, as your film certainly does. It is The $6 Billion Man about Julian Assange, and we've been joined by the director and producer, Eugene Jarecki. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Matt. It's great to be here.